So as my colleague Holly already mentioned, where we heard a bit more about the high-level policy context, new and upgraded electricity network infrastructure is needed to connect new demand and more distributed sources of electricity. I'd like to build on this in a little bit more detail and what that means for the electricity network specifically. So areas of new demand that need electrification might include low voltage assets in residential or commercial buildings, such as heat pumps or electric vehicles that are looking to connect to the lower voltages of the networks. And at the same time, we're seeing a lot of larger developments such as housing or new areas of growth from data centers or new industrial demands that are seeking higher voltage network connections. All of this is going to require new network infrastructure to enable those types of connections. And on the electricity supplied side of things, renewables are rapidly growing to accommodate the need for the transition away from fossil fuels. This means developing lower voltage networks and its underlying infrastructure, because these types of developments are far more likely to fall under local authority planning procedures, since the assets needed to connect will be typically smaller in voltage level and be spread out in a more geographically dispersed fashion across the country. Just really briefly, this graph here on the right is from NESO's future energy scenarios, and it illustrates the proportion of electricity expected to provide final consumer energy demand as the grids decarbonize. So in all of those pathways, those colored dotted lines over there on the right, we're seeing electricity sector emissions fall and less large-scale fossil fuels providing our electricity, but an increase in electrification as renewable projects start to take more of the electricity generation mix. Next slide, please, Hazel. So we're also seeing a shift towards more proactive network investment, and this is to ensure that more renewables are able to connect to the grids. And we will need to expand the low voltage distribution networks in order to do so. This is really illustrated quite well with the constraints map here. Region have done some work recently in this area, and we're visualizing here those red circles where the bulk supply points and primary substations are already reaching their capacity limits. So this illustrates quite well that there is a need to increase network capacity to allow for new customer connections to connect in sites like this in the future. It's important to note that networks are also regulated and make up a large part of consumer bills. So this also has an economic consideration. Historically, investment has been quite reactionary to avoid stranded assets in these higher bills, and this has led in part to these constraints. So as we're running out of room on the networks, we're realizing this isn't such a sustainable growth pattern. And if we want new generation projects to be able to connect in 5 or 10 years' time, then we need to invest in the grid now in a proactive manner as opposed to reactive. Next slide, please. So these maps illustrate my point quite well. Over here on the left, we see an energy system in 2008 where the electricity supply was still met with a smaller number of very large capacity, typically fossil fuel assets connected to the transmission networks. And many of these projects, these energy generation projects, would have been permitted through the national consenting routes. But to the right, we see images of 2018 and out into the future, illustrating how this system has been changing. So much of that infrastructure has already been built, but more will be required to accommodate the projects currently in the pipeline seeking to connect. Next slide, please. So the government does have a plan. Under the Connections Action Plan, the government is accelerating the connection of clean energy projects and associated infrastructure by clearing a backlog of dormant projects. So to prove the sort of readiness, low carbon energy projects waiting to connect to the grid have been asked to demonstrate that they have obtained planning and that they have obtained land rights for their project. If these two criteria can be demonstrated, then they have been allowed to jump the queue to accelerate their connection offer. And this is a change from the original first come, first served grid connection process. So this reflects a sense of urgency for certain projects to show that they have obtained planning and demonstrate readiness. And as a result, and I'd be interested to know if those on the call who have seen planning applications for network infrastructure, if there have been any sorts of citing of the need to secure planning for grid infrastructure within those planning applications as a result of the Connections Action Plan. So yeah, do pop that in the chat if you've seen any mention of these sorts of policies as a justification of need for that planning to be successful in the chat, or do mention it in our Q&A later. Next slide, please. So I won't linger too long on this because Holly has already touched on it, but the Clean Power 2030 Action Plan does set ambition for new renewable projects and the associated network infrastructure. And it says that by 2030, most electricity in Great Britain will need to be met by low carbon sources. So there's specific commitments on that in terms of specific technologies, and we're seeing a more doubling of deployment for both solar and wind generation from today's levels. New electricity generation will, of course, require more network infrastructure to enable that. Next slide, please. So let's take a step back here from the policy context and get straight into the network infrastructure itself. What types of infrastructure projects might you encounter as a local planning officer? So I'll start with the gray zone here with the overhead lines. Now, overhead lines of 132 kV and more than 2 kilometers in length are typically considered as nationally significant infrastructure projects, and decisions are carried out by the Secretary of State. Certain overhead electricity lines require consent under Section 37 rather than the Planning Act, and Section 37 typically applies to overhead lines of below 132 kV and can apply to lines as low as 20 kV. So typically a local authority wouldn't be seeing a new electricity line coming through, but it can happen. Typically, electricity lines rarely fall under TCPA consenting where permitted development rights do not apply. And I'll get into that a little bit later and what that means in terms of the limitations. But I'll just take our attention to the right of the slide here, where we can have an idea of the types of applications that you might see. So this might be new substations of above 29 cubic meters, subsea cables and some enabling works for NSIP projects. So local authorities might be consulted for national level projects, and under some circumstances, a permitted development rights project may be deemed to require planning consent. So let's take a bit more look in detail on the next slide, please. So the Town and Country Planning Act mainly concerns new cables, towers, transformers, and substations. As I mentioned in the previous slide, the types of infrastructure that local planning officers might expect to see is a bit more around these new connection points, so these new substations. You might see the reinforcement of existing lines or substations, or perhaps the uprating of existing lines, so increasing their capacity. Perhaps new cables and routes between existing substations, or any ancillary infrastructure, so access tracks, earthworks, etc. And I just want to speak very briefly about the general permitted development order and where some of these rights do and do not apply. So the GPDO grants rights to certain electricity network developments to statutory undertakers or license holders. And these statutory electricity undertakers, such as the distribution network operators, can carry out certain works without needing to apply for planning permission. But these works are subject to certain thresholds and limitations. So the height of poles or the location of the apparatus or the extent of the works may mean that some of these applications might move to planning consents and need to be consented. They can also be removed under an Article 4 direction, for example, in sensitive areas such as national parks, national landscapes, or other designated areas. PD rights will also not apply to projects requiring environmental impact assessment or habitats regulation assessment. Even in the case of permitted developments, local planning authorities may be required to give prior approval based on siting, design, appearance, and landscape impacts. And upon assessment, planning officers should be able to determine if permitted development rights do apply to the development in question. They may also enforce any breaches of PD rights where the works exceed the permitted development scope. Next slide, please. So now that we have an idea of the types of developments you might see, I just wanted to get into some of the potential impacts and what that might look like on paper and in reality. So the electricity network infrastructure can have various visual and landscape impacts depending on the type of infrastructure and its proposed location. Assessments can be triggered when a proposal is visible from designated or protected landscapes or from open or undeveloped land where the development would be more prominent. Applications should submit proportionate landscape and visual impact assessments where appropriate, as supported with viewpoints and wirelines and photo montages, an example of which you can see here on the slide. Next slide, please. So noise is another one that gets cited quite a bit. Electricity network infrastructure can have potential noise impacts depending on the type of infrastructure and its proposed location. Transformers located on poles or in substations often emit continuous humming noises, which may increase in volume at higher voltages. Other substation equipment, including cooling equipment, may also emit a low-level noise. And overhead power lines, poles, and pylons may be the source of wind-related noise, which can be a difficult one to mitigate. So local planning authorities should assess both construction phase and operational noise impacts, and if needed, a noise assessment can be included or added as a condition for background noise monitoring, or rating level or noise modeling or evaluations can also take place. Next slide, please. So electricity network infrastructure can have different potential traffic and access impacts depending on the type of infrastructure and its location. These impacts typically are very temporary and construction phase only, which with limited traffic during operation of the site itself. But during construction, these sites might require HGVs and abnormal loads to deliver various substation parts or components. So LPAs can consider whether the existing arrangements are suitable and whether rights of way would be affected. Next slide, please. Electromagnetic fields. These do come up quite a bit as well and are usually a hot topic. But electric and magnetic fields are generated by electric voltage and current respectively, which are present in all electrical equipment, including electricity network infrastructure. As well as household equipment, as you can see with the graph, with the image on the screen here. And electromagnetic fields are a phenomenon which involves the simultaneous existence of electric field and magnetic field. So for TCPA consented developments, EMF considerations are most relevant for substations, transformers, above ground electrical equipment associated with underground cables and overhead lines. At high levels, EMFs have negative impacts on human health. To mitigate the risks of these impacts, in the UK, all overhead lines are designed to comply with EMF exposure limits. Local authorities can seek confirmation that the proposed infrastructure do in fact comply with the UK's EMF exposure limits. So yeah, as we see here on the right, network assets often have a lower magnetic field than some typical household appliances. And it's also true that the walls of residential properties can act as a protective shield from exposure levels if equipment happens to be installed nearby. Furthermore, underground cables eliminate electric fields altogether, as the sheath around the cable screens these out quite effectively. So yeah. Next slide, please. Heritage. Developments may affect heritage sites by changing their setting, especially for assets which derive their significance from their relationship with the surrounding landscape. These impacts may be closely linked with the landscape and their visual impacts of the development as well. So what can a local authority expect? Well, LPAs should expect a heritage impact assessment that assesses both direct and indirect impacts where relevant, including setting and intervisibility, supported where necessary by photo montages and heritage assets, where heritage assets could be affected. So there's some really good guidance on this that already exists called the Planning Practice Guidance on the Historic Environment, which I'm sure is relevant for other proposals that you've seen for other types of applications. And my last slide is going to be on archaeological impacts. Ground and earthworks can impact sites with the potential to have archaeological significance. Underground works potentially risky for archaeological artifacts in relation to network infrastructure might include pylons and pole bases, substation foundations and grounding works, underground cables, and any sites in greenfield land might also be a matter of concern. So according to paragraph 207 of the NPPF, where a site includes or has the potential to include heritage assets with archaeological interest, local authorities should require developments to submit an appropriate desk-based assessment and, where necessary, a field evaluation. So in practice, you should expect to see an archaeological desk-based assessment where there's a perceived risk, and if those risks are found to be warranted, then a field evaluation can be conducted. And it's important to note that in past applications, a statement of archaeological significance and risk can be made, but refusal based on the findings of these assessments is quite rare, and a field evaluation and mitigation strategies might apply.
Good afternoon, and I think trying to sort of capture all of the sort of experiences of LPA interaction from the DNO perspective, obviously too broad. So I thought it might be helpful if I shared with you how we approach training our teams to deal with planning matters and interaction with local planning authorities. And the reason for that is I thought it might be helpful if we drew attention to how we're encouraging our estates and wayleaves specialists to engage in the planning system, and hopefully any suggestions or ideas from how we can improve that might filter down and we can improve the whole interaction process. So just to say also, I'm intending that this sort of just focuses on town and country planning and section 37 matters. I'm not intending that this sort of covers DCO stuff, which is obviously a very sort of separate category. So with that in mind, then I thought it'd be helpful if we just focus on two compartments. First of all is how the planning system fundamentals and definition of development, we're training that out, and then also how we're trying to encourage better engagement, particularly with case officers in the local authority. But first off, always time for a very quick safety moment. If you move on one, thank you. This is something that absolutely underpins a lot of safety work we do at National Grid, and we do a lot of work around that. What would it be like at your house tonight if you were never coming home? And there's a whole string of things that derive from that, but also within our team we've got colleagues who've experienced that, so it's something that's very real, but also it helps focus the message and hear about texting whilst driving. And if the dangers of that don't resonate with you, remember it's 6 points and you could probably be looking at the thick end of £1,000 fine. So just keep off your phone whilst you're driving, pull over, do it there. So on to the first one then. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this was the first compartment then, just some of the things that we're trying to get across to the teams that we're working with. We spend a lot of time just sort of putting things into context in planning. A lot of our specialists and people that work in the DNO don't come from planning backgrounds. And so we're trying to make sure that they've got some understanding about how the planning system works, whether it's just applications or the development plan system as well, and that they've got an understanding, so there's some context there for the work that they're doing. We're also making sure that they're trying to be kept up to date with broader policy changes, particularly stuff like, say, Bruce Pollard, our head of planning, leading on through the Estates and Wayleaves Forum with changes to permitted development and those initiatives that the ENA are moving forward in terms of trying to improve the planning situation. As I said, we focus on the acts, the guidance, the NPPF, and also just getting around that gnarly problem, which if you're not a planner is always difficult to sort of try and grapple with sometimes, about material considerations and the importance to those, particularly in the sorts of infrastructure and applications that we're dealing with. I mentioned definition of development, but quite often you'd be surprised within the business, we're being asked to do stuff that actually isn't planning and doesn't require consents and stuff. So we take people through how to work through what's needed, and then also make sure that they're aware of the different types of consent. And as I said there on the slide, not just town and country planning, but also permissions, but what you can do through PD, and also what is actually section 37 under the Electricity Act. We also off the back of the PD, make sure that people understand when and when they don't need to make an application, and also point out that sometimes it's different in different areas. Obviously, we don't cover our particular part of the business, Scotland, but we certainly do in Wales, and that we're making and ensure that people understand where there are differences, what they are. Just on to the next one then, please. Just some examples I've taken just from our training slides, just very quickly. I'm not going to talk to them in detail, but this is the slide that we use when we're helping people understand the decision-making steps to go through. Is it development, yes or no? Are we dealing with, actually, if it is a permitted development, and ultimately, does it require a planning permission? And if so, how to go about the planning application? On the next one, please. Thank you, Hazel. This is just taken from the set of slides where we're dealing with our permitted development decision-making steps, and to encourage them to be challenging so that we can come informed when we're looking to get to the point of engagement with the local authority. And also, we're aware that electricity applications and development isn't the everyday work of local authorities a lot of the time. So making sure that we can help with the engagement, pointing people in the right direction, case offers to relevant legislation, exemption regulations, etc., and to help, to sort of do a collective walk through the process. And then just the final one, again on permitted development. Next slide, please. Thank you. Was to look at obviously the permitted development tables. Permitted development orders not the easiest thing to navigate, so we've tried to summarize that in some form of a table, just to and we share this with our colleagues, just to give a flavor for what is permitted, but importantly what isn't permitted, i.e. off to an application, and also those conditions that might be associated with it. Okay, so that's that sort of first compartment. And then the second compartment, thank you, was about engagement. And this is something that's really, really important to us. As I've said, electricity planning, it's a bit niche, and we're always, making sure that when we are submitting inquiries or applications and stuff, we're particularly encouraging people to make sure they're sending out copies of relevant, like I said, relevant legislation or guidance, and just also, but not just sending it, just pointing to the relevant bit and highlighting the areas that we think are relevant. Very important thing that's been touched on already, but I'm always very keen that we get across that, not making any political points, but the fact is caseloads are big, substantial, resources are always tight and stretched, so making sure that we're mindful of that and not trying to be not intentionally or unintentionally being unreasonable in what we're asking people to do at the other end. We also try to remind people that there's more to a planning application than filling out the forms, and that's not necessarily just for the people in our team, but it's particularly for our engineering colleagues. And we're very focused on making people aware of just how much is required sometimes to get a planning application registered and through the process. And to that extent, we, depending on what the development or the issue may be, making sure that where appropriate and where necessary, we're using planning consultants, we're using professionals to assist, not just with the technical reports like the ecology or the archaeology, where you obviously very definitely need specialists, but that planning in itself is a specialism, and having people who are dealing regularly in the system and can help steer us through is an important part to it. I've touched on our training materials, but we do try and make sure that people do go back to that and use that again to help the applications through the process. And something that's really important for me, making sure that we're aware about what the end goal is. And so often in our sort of project-driven worlds, we're focused, or our colleagues get focused on the submission planning application, and that's not it. Keeping an eye on the end goal is that we don't need a planning application submitted. What we need is a consent at the end so we can go and build something and get some network up and running. And that's the end goal. And actually, by doing things like pre-application, the early engagement with local planning authorities often saves time, it certainly saves the resources, and also can help local authorities get us, work with us better to get through, because it helps their understanding too. And then just a final thought on this slide was, I saw this quote when I was visiting the TerraQuest offices recently to drop off a check for an application we were doing, and life is simple and we make it complex. And I think there's very much, you look at the planning system now, it's completely different to when I entered planning, and maybe what they initially envisaged when the planning system was being set up. But equally, the point we're trying to get across is that there's no point in trying to fight it. The regulations are there, the system is what it is. So working with people, helping people out is usually the best way to navigate through it. And like I say, keeping an eye on the end goal is what we're about, and also trying to do that in a constructive and engaged manner. So appreciate, sorry, a bit of a counter through, obviously want to allow time for some questions and stuff, but those are just some of the thoughts I thought hopefully you might find interesting on how we're trying to make sure we can better engage with local authorities from the DNO perspective, and when we're coming to you and asking for your assistance with our proposals.
Very excited to be joining this afternoon to everyone. Flora will just bring up our slides. We'll make sure we'll get the right slide up on the screen, and then I'll get kick started. So I'm Lynne McDonald, the head of Local Net Zero at UK Power Networks distribution system operator, and I'm joined by Flora Mavri from my team, who is a Net Zero associate. So for those that don't know who UK Power Networks are, we are the electricity provider serving London, South East and East of England. Specifically with focusing on your topic today of onshore wind, and obviously supporting you to go from site selection through to connection. So a few things that I wanted to highlight. First is the importance of data. Very much data plays that key role as a planner to try and understand the sites that you're selecting or not selecting, so you can justify that both internally but also through your community engagement with your local area. And I'd like to signpost two key things that we make available as UK Power Networks that can help you in that planning journey. The first is a very powerful data set. It's specifically called IRENIS. It's onshore wind power land suitability. And we collaborated with Anglia Ruskin University to make that fully available across our 133 local authorities. It's also important to note that of the 133 local authorities that we serve, 28 is shared with other system operators. That means that you could be served by us, also our colleagues in Scottish and Southern Electricity Networks and National Grid Electricity Distribution. But we made sure that even though, for example, in some areas where we only cover 2% of that physical geography, we made sure that this data set served all areas. So that means if you're served only by a slither of us, we've made sure that this onshore wind power suitability is available for all of your area to make it as equitable as possible for you to plan better. Now, you're probably wondering, what is this onshore wind power land suitability? Well, what we've done with Anglia Ruskin University and some consultancy groups, it's an overall assessment of the suitability of a specific area in installing wind generation. It gives a very simple and easy to use grading around yes, it's suitable, no, it's not suitable, or maybe it could be suitable. And this data can be accessed through our dedicated LEAP Open Data Portal page. It's openly available to all local authorities and local actors or anyone interested to use it. And really also what it also has is not only the suitability of land for onshore wind developments, it also looks at the calculation of the potential energy density, looking also at wind speeds and sort of making sure that you can understand what you could connect. So I'd certainly highlight, please do go check out our onshore wind power land suitability that's openly available on our data page. And also, I'd say in terms of then making sure you can visualize that, what we also have available is our digital tool, Leap Plus. Now, Leap Plus is a collaboration with our digital providers, Advanced Infrastructure. Leap Plus also includes that great data set I've just shared through IRENIS, but it also has other very fantastic, powerful data to help you plan, build your projects and portfolios, also with access to our network infrastructure data and headroom data. Now, LEAP Plus is freely available to all local authorities, and local authorities can use a planner, but local authorities can also bring in their collaborators, others that they're planning with, so you can have a shared space to build on those onshore wind projects over time. So you've got the data, the digital tools, but then also into planning. Certainly what we're seeing is UKPR Networks and my reflections of my team being here for now, it'll be our birthday on the 1st of April. We've been around for 3 years, is we've seen a certain acceleration and momentum in local area energy planning. So of the 133 local authorities that we serve, we have now about 73 local authorities that have either completed or are in progress of a LEAP. That's 3 times more compared to back in 2022. And that's making a demonstrable impact because that local intelligence we're using to enhance our forecasts to make sure that we're planning the network and expanding network capacity where it matters most for the communities that we serve. So certainly as you as a planner, if you're involved in a local energy plan, if you're considering it, or you've got projections on your onshore wind, please engage with my team as early as possible, and we can look to bring in those particular data points into our plans. So in short, I'd highlight as UKPR Networks and my team, the UKPR Networks Distribution System Operator Local Net Zero team, we're here to help you. You've got freely available access to the data, digital tools, but the important thing to end on is the people. My team are here to help. Please reach out to us at leap@ukprnetworks.co.uk, or please visit our dedicated website, the Your Local Net Zero Hub website, and that's ultimately where you can book a meeting with my team at your time and convenience. And we're very excited to support your inclusive economic growth and your decarbonisation activities across our area. And we very much want your feedback, how my team, the Data and Digitals, is helping you, or if you have other ideas or areas that we can improve, very much want to hear it and be on that journey with you. So thank you so much for inviting us along, and very excited to support you in your next steps.